thinking, oh, well, he's not really trying to trip up Jesus, or he's not being that malicious. Maybe he's just interested. Maybe he's just trying to learn. At this point when he asks his question, that doubt is gone. With this question, we know that he has no interest in loving God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that his heart is not even in the right place when he asks, who is my neighbor? That doesn't seem like a bad question at first, does it? Who is my neighbor? It's not a big deal. It doesn't seem like it was that bad of a question. But if you look a little deeper, you see that his question isn't who is my neighbor. His question more along the lines is, who isn't my neighbor? Isn't it? If you think, if I told you to love your neighbor, why would you ask me who is my neighbor? You're trying to figure out who you have to love and who you don't, right? That's exactly what it is. Those of you who have kids or who work with kids, you understand this, right? Because if you tell your kid, go and clean the kitchen, and they ask, what does cleaning the kitchen mean? It's not because they're really eager about cleaning the kitchen, they want to know what all that entails, is it? That's not what they're talking about. They're asking what is cleaning the kitchen because they're hoping you say, put away the leftovers and wipe down the counter, because they're trying their hardest to get out of not cleaning the dishes and not taking out the trash, aren't they? That's why they're asking that question. This man asked, who is my neighbor? Not because he's excited about who he gets to go love, but because he wants Jesus to give him these clear-cut boundaries. He's hoping to hear, well, love the other people who have the same faith as you. Love your family, probably. Love maybe some people who live next door to you. He's hoping to hear just that, because when he hears that, he's also going to hear that he has free reign to hate. Free reign to hate the Romans who occupy his land and who slaughter his people. Free reign to hate the political opponents he might have. Free reign to hate other people. He's sitting there going, come on, Jesus, tell me who my neighbors are so I can figure out where I can draw the line and stop loving people. But Jesus, being God in the flesh, a God who the Bible describes to us as being the very essence of love, doesn't give him what he wants, does he? Instead, he tells him the story that we've come to know so well thousands of years later. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell in the hands of robbers. Believe it or not, this road that Jesus was telling us about is still there today. If you went and traveled to Israel, you could go walk on this road that Jesus is talking about in this story. And you can tell by this road that it's very isolated, that the terrain here is perfectly built around for robbers to be able to hide behind sharp turns or boulders, and they'd be able to jump out and attack you last second. Not to mention that this was the only road going between two major cities, and so there was plenty of prey for the wicked. And it's in this setting that Jesus tells us of a man who was beaten, who was humiliated, who was robbed, and who was left for dead. And I think we need to see that in our mind's eye to recognize the extent of the suffering that this man actually went through and endured. To picture him as being someone who is completely hurt and helpless and fully at the mercy of others. Because I read this story, and I know a lot of other people who read this story, and it doesn't really touch us very much. If this was an article on Facebook, we'd be crazy sorry for this person, wouldn't we? Because for some reason, Facebook articles touch us a little bit more than reading biblical stories. And so I want us to recognize that a little bit. I want us to let this story come to life, to picture him hurt, beaten, robbed of maybe his savings, maybe wondering if he gets to see his family again. I don't want to let my imagination run wild, but at the same time, I want us to buy into this story that Jesus is presenting us with. And lucky for him, a priest was coming by. A priest, a man of God, someone who had dedicated their life to knowing God and being the go-between between man and God. And this, for our hurt man, this is absolutely the best case scenario, isn't it? This is what you would want, would be this priest to come by when you're beaten and broken. This is who you want. And yet when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And when I picture that, I picture him doing this thing that we've all been guilty of before, where you see something going on that you don't want to be involved in. So you look in the opposite direction, but just kind of straight enough to look like you're not doing it on purpose, and you try to avoid him. I picture him doing that, at the same time maybe pulling his robe to the side to keep blood from getting on it. This idea that he saw and knew this broken man who was in desperate need and desperately helpless, and chose to walk by on the other side, ignoring a broken man whom God loves. But then a Levite comes by. And Levites their whole tribe was given this responsibility to care for the temple and to assist the priests, who are the sons of Aaron, descendants of Aaron. And so they were also seen as men of God who represented the Lord wherever they went. They based their entire lives off of following the laws of God and encouraging others to do the same. Yet here in the desert, with no one watching, he does the same thing that the priest does. He walks by on the other side, ignoring an individual who was made in the image of God, a broken individual. And I hope that you can be as surprised and as struck by this story as I think that Jesus' original audience probably was. You know, if any of them had known anybody who was in that bad of trouble and that bad of need, literally the first people that they thought would have helped would have been priests and Levites. I'm completely convinced that if Jesus told this story today, he would have said an elder and a preacher were the two people that walked by on the side of the road without helping the man. If you read my bulletin article this morning, it's talked about the reversal in Luke, how Luke continually takes things that you expect and then flips it on its head. And this is exactly what's happening in this story. You know, these were supposed to be the good guys, but they did not care at all. And why not? Why didn't they care? Well, at least for this specific priest and this specific Levite, I think that they were living their lives through questions like the expert in the law asked when he said, "Who is my neighbor?" They were living a faith that said, "What's my duty?" Because if it's not listed, I'm not doing it, right? For them, their duties in the temple were over. It was their day off. And so if there's not a law saying that I have to help this broken man on the street on my day off, then I'm not doing it. It came down to these basic, where can I start, where can I stop? You know, if I don't have the responsibility to help him today, I'm not helping him today. He's not my neighbor today. Brothers and sisters, I hope that just hearing thoughts like that puts a bad taste in your mouth. I pray that we are close enough to God that this kind of excuse to not love somebody just makes us uncomfortable. You know, but this isn't just a hypothetical story from 2,000 years ago. These things happen on a daily basis. And it happens to the best of us as well. In fact, there's a research study that was done in the 70s where these researchers went out and they collected a bunch of Bible majors, right? Future youth ministers, future preachers. I promise Todd wasn't one of them. He didn't really go to school in the 70s. But they get these future Bible majors and future preachers, and they charged them. They said, hey, in a few weeks, go back and study, prepare. In a few weeks, we want you to bring us a lesson on the Good Samaritan. Okay? I want you to come back and give us a lesson on the Good Samaritan. So these Bible majors, they went back, and for weeks, they studied, they read Scripture, they poured their minds over the Good Samaritan week after week and prepared these lessons. Now, when the day came for them to give these lessons to this research board, the catch was that the research board had placed outside the doors of the place where they were supposed to give their lesson a obviously hurt and obviously needy man right in front of the building. See where this is going? Right in front of the building where they directly had to walk around him or right by him to get in the doors. And so, with this story on their mind, and they went in to give their presentation, 70% of those Bible students walked right by that man, completely ignored him. They passed by on the other side. You know, I'm sure those young men were nervous about the speeches they had to give, maybe distracted with excitement, maybe they were worried about getting there on time, but the disconnect between what they knew in their mind and what they did through their heart is truly astounding. When we allow Satan to bring us to this level where we know a bunch but do very little, Satan becomes a very happy person. Because when Christians start living this lifestyle, we're going to see a lot more hurt and suffering people in the world because we won't be there to help them. Believe it or not, guys, this world can become a whole lot worse if the people of God don't live out the lessons that they've learned from His Word. Isn't that true? Yeah. But thankfully for the hurt man in this story, there was a third person who walks by. And I can only imagine who the audience thought Jesus was going to list as the third person who would help this man. You know, you've got a priest, you've got a Levite. Maybe this expert of the law was thinking to himself, oh, it's going to be me, right? It's going to be me that's going to help the man. It's going to be an expert of the law. Maybe it's going to be a Pharisee. They're trying to, whoever they thought was going to be that third person, I guarantee you, they didn't think it was going to be a Samaritan. Right? To give you some background on the Samaritans, long before Jesus, Israel's disobedience to God was punished by the takeover and the exile of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Okay, so a little bit of history here. They defeated Israel in battle, they took all their goods, and they enslaved a large chunk of their population and to bring them back to Assyria and Babylon as slaves. And when you do this, when you're taking back a large people to come be your slaves, you take the best of the people. You take the nobles, you take the educated, you take the wealthy, for a couple of different reasons. One, they make more intelligent, capable slaves for you, right? And two, if you left them behind, they're going to be the people that can successfully revolt against you. And so they took these wealthy, intelligent, noble people. And so the lower, weaker, less appreciated class of people were already left on the land of Israel. And then you have the Assyrians and the Babylonians moving their own people into land, because when you take over land, you want to fill it with your own people. And eventually, these leftover Israelites who are there intermarried with the enemy. And then on top of that, they adopted their idol worship and kind of meshed it together with their Jewish faith. And those were the people that later became known as Samaritans. And so decades later, when the Israelites who were captured came back to their homeland, they didn't really appreciate what their long-lost cousins had been doing. And so this animosity kept building and building over the years, and they had laws that kept the Samaritans down. They avoided them socially. In fact, we're going to talk more about this next week because I accidentally planned 2 Samaritan sermons in a row. So we're talking about John 4 and the Samaritan woman at the well next week. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But I do want to share one quick story that's just like very close by contextually on the dislike for Samaritans. So if you have your Bibles open to Luke 10, flip back one page. We're going to go to Luke 9:51, and I'll have it up here too. Luke 9:51. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus set his eyes out for Jerusalem. Flu brain. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and then him and his disciples went to another village. So they rejected Jesus because he was going to Jerusalem. In John 4, you see that the Samaritans did not respect the power of Jerusalem. And so, I imagine that over Jesus' 3-year ministry, with the amount of controversy he brought with him, that there was probably a good bit of towns that rejected Jesus over those 3 years. And I imagine usually you just kind of move on to the next town until somebody takes you in. But here in a Samaritan village, James and John, good old sons of thunder, right? Like, hey, Jesus, they wouldn't let us stay in our town. Let's call down fire from heaven and destroy them. That escalated really quickly, guys. You don't get that? Yeah. That's extreme. You don't call down fire from heaven because somebody doesn't let you sleep over. I expected a bigger reaction. Thank you. But hey, this is the level of animosity that we have between these two peoples, okay? And so when Jesus inserts a Samaritan to his parable and says that he was the one who stopped to help, that was mind-blowing for them. This is even more surprising than a priest and a Levite not stopping to help. They were supposed to hate each other. In fact, in their minds, if a Samaritan was going to walk by this man, the only thing he would do was spit on him as he passed by on the other side. But he doesn't do that. He stops. And he does more than just help the man up and say, hey, there you go. Glad you're off the ground now. He puts himself in danger by stopping, So he puts himself in danger by stopping to help the man, right? It's sad, but for thousands of years, people have used the injured as bait to hurt the healthy, right? But the idea that he stopped to help this man himself, when robbers could have just been waiting behind the rocks, ready to attack a second person who's bent over trying to help somebody, would have been very legitimate fear for him to have. And then he uses his own resources, wine and oil is what it tells us specifically, that he might have, who knows what he was planning to use those for, if he was going up to Jerusalem to make sacrifices. He uses his own resources to help him. He makes his life more difficult on his own by putting the man on his donkey. Guys, that road that we looked at, 18 miles long. I have no idea where this happened. Could have happened in the last mile, could have happened in the first mile, but they probably weren't going a very short distance, and he put this hurt man on his donkey and he walked the rest of the way. They get to the inn, and he gives him more in-depth care there. He doesn't just pass him off as we sometimes picture the story. He stops and he continues to care for him at the inn. And then he makes a financial sacrifice for his well-being, gives the innkeeper 2 denarii to continue to care for him. And then he puts himself in a very vulnerable situation, saying, I'll come back and pay for more. The inns of biblical times are not the nice Marriotts we have today. They were very sketchy places, and if they could take advantage of you in this kind of way, they were probably going to. But he made these self-sacrifices. He put himself in these vulnerable situations in a very Jesus-like manner to care for somebody. Not just somebody he didn't know, but somebody, if he did know, probably would hate him. This is radical. This is the definition of going the extra mile. This unlikely servant, this would-be enemy, has loved this man and served him as a neighbor. Jesus asks the expert of the law at the end of the story, which of these was a neighbor? And he says, the one who showed mercy, because he can't bring himself to say Samaritan, right? The one who showed mercy. Who is your neighbor? Any and everyone. There is not a person out there that you can draw a line between you and them and say, this person is not my neighbor. I don't have to show Christian love to this person. That doesn't exist. Regardless of their political opinion, their faith, their sexuality, their citizenship, their criminal record, or even their really obnoxious Facebook posts, there is not a line that can be drawn. God has said that that person is your neighbor, and you are to love him as yourself. And I think that all of us here would agree that that's a good idea, right? No one's going to argue that loving everybody is a bad idea, or at least hopefully, or probably not publicly, right? Everyone is going to agree that we should love each other. But while that's a great idea, it's a very hard reality, isn't it? It's a very hard reality, because usually the neighbor that needs us the most isn't the neighbor we would have picked for ourselves, but it's a neighbor that God has picked for us. Here's a couple of short list. Here's a couple of neighbors who God has put in your life that you might not have picked for yourself, okay? Family. Yeah. Everybody's got crazy cousin Eddie, right? That shows up on your front door with an ugly RV and just is going to drive you out of your mind. Everybody has one. You didn't pick crazy cousin Eddie, but he's still there for you to love. Church family, ooh, that's awkward, right? Don't glance at anybody because they might be glancing back at you, okay? You know, we are supposed to be a united family that loves each other and that supports each other and encourages each other. And I think we are, especially here at Central Church Christ. And I'm speaking globally right now. But when you bring 200 people together into a room, there's going to be a couple personalities that just don't click, isn't there? You've seen it. I've seen it. A couple personalities that just don't click. There's also going to be that one person who, dadgummit, disagrees with your view of Habakkuk. And so you don't like them because of that either. We're okay to have these disagreements. We're okay to have somebody irk you and you not want to go hang out with them on a Friday night. But we're still called to love them and to encourage them and to be there for them, especially as your Christian brother and sister. People in your community. This was Todd because he lived in Ohio where Ohio State fans were everywhere, and he did not like that, right? You know, but everybody, a lot of people are found in a community where they don't agree. They don't agree with the politics of their community. They don't agree with this or that. But that's okay. You're there for a reason. and you have a chance to love those people even in your disagreements. And then lastly, how about your actual neighbors? Not your neighbors, but your neighbors. I got a good one for you. Me and Delaney moved into our house in May. The first day we moved into our house, before we went to bed, our neighbors came over and complained about something. They have complained many times the last 6 months about anything. And look at it. We're not partying ragers at 1 a.m., are we? We have a 4-month-old with the flu. You know, we're not that loud. Last week, home with Lorelai with the flu, I see someone across my front window. I hear the doorbell, and I see him book it again. I'm like, that's weird. I open the door, and I see my neighbor jump in her car and book it down the road. There's this nice little letter taped to my front door. Take it down, look at it. I am apparently abusive for letting my dog play in the snow for 40 minutes. You can imagine my attitude was not as calm as it is now. You know, especially after all the random stuff. We were fed up. I was mad. We were debating letting the police kind of put some stuff on record for harassment charges, and we were mad, okay? And it was a heated moment. However, I had just written the sermon. So, gave it a little bit of time. I still went and talked to our neighbor, and we had a discussion, and we found some common ground, but we did it in a way that left the door open for me to still be able to be a Christian witness to them. I'm not saying you can never get the police involved with stuff, because obviously that is a necessity that has to happen. But being able to come to somebody in a calm manner, I'm sure this person has done it to other people, right? And I'm sure come yelling and busting through their front door. But if I can calmly have a discussion with them and still be able to hold on to some Christian love for the person, that's what we're called to do. That's loving your neighbor even when you didn't pick them, and even when they're not somebody you really want to have that relationship with. You know, these are unchosen neighbors who you have a direct contact and who your love and your service to they can come to know God because of that. And you got to remember, that's what this whole sermon series is about. This is about outreach. It's about bringing love of God to people who don't know it. And so today, hopefully, it was obvious that we answered this question: who is my neighbor? Any and everyone. I hope that's obvious. I hope that's something you knew, even though it's hard to practice. I hope that's something that's been drilled down into your heart. But here's a better question that I think Jesus asks at the end of this story that we read today. What kind of neighbor will you be? Question Jesus asked the expert in the law at the end of our story today was, which one of these was the neighbor? How do you determine the neighbor? Based off the actions. And he said, the one who showed him mercy. It's no longer about their status of deserving, okay? It's no longer about their status of deserving. It's about your status of action. Do you hear that? Not how much love they deserve, but how much love you're willing to give. The Samaritan didn't owe the hurt man anything. The hurt man didn't deserve anything. But he understood the will of God, and he loved him to the extreme and served him anyways. And Jesus tells us to go and to do likewise. Go be this type of neighbor, a neighbor that loves without borders and serves radically, even with awkward tabbing. One that loves without borders and serves radically. Just like the example that we see here in the Good Samaritan, but also the example we see throughout the life of Jesus. And I want us to come back to that. The Good Samaritan, or the compassionate Samaritan, I like that term so much more, because good is so vague and boring, but compassionate Samaritan. But we got to look at Jesus. Jesus lived this out. Jesus loved us and served us even through his death. That is radical service, and that is love without borders. And it's important to remember that we live this life with love without borders and serving radically, that we do this because once it was you who was broken and beaten on the side of the road. We were the ones half dead and heading down a path to eternal suffering. But it was a good Savior who came and rescued us and paid the price for our healing and restoration. And it's because of him that we follow in his footsteps to love God and to love others. If we can help you in any way this morning, won't you come?